Spiritual contemplation is what I call it. Some people call it prayer, meditation. They're just words, but I use the word spiritual contemplation. And I have talked about this a little bit, but I haven't really gone into more detail. I haven't done a lot of this kind of work publicly. I do a lot of it privately. But because of what seems to be happening in what's called human world, or the external world, I feel it is essential for me to begin more of this work publicly. In other words, sharing it more publicly. And it is essential to understand the basic question, which is, one of the things that I contemplate in my so-called private spaces, which space is not even really a good word, but the language of English or any specifically language like that is limiting as far as expressing how we feel, and that's why contemplation is important, to consider the subjects, the content that you're hearing, or the feelings that you're feeling, beyond the 5 so-called human senses. And let's start with the idea of who are we, or who am I? Same kind of thing, actually. What I have said publicly is we are each individuals essential to the completeness of the whole. So the individuals, are part of the whole. The whole exists because of the individuals. It's all one. And with that idea, that's really the basic focal point of contemplation. And by contemplation, I mean consideration of what actually exists here and now. And while it seems complicated, it's not. I like to say the universe isn't complicated. We do understand it. There are a lot of details, but it's not complicated. Essentially, we are the universe, because all that actually exists is consciousness. It's all one, and it doesn't matter what words that are used to describe what it is, as long as we understand what it is. And that is something that we do in contemplation. Considering what is, considering what is real here and now. There are many words that I use. Eternal, eternity, infinite, infinity, perfection. Consciousness is all of this, and we are that as well. Because we are essential to the completeness that is the universe. We are consciousness, so we are essential to what that is. Each one. We are not human beings. There's an expression that goes, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Something like that. Even that really doesn't fully encompass the contemplation. For some, it may be a start. It does seem like in the world, the external world, the human world, there's a lot of turmoil, more than ever. And A teacher that I had for decades talked about the turmoil of the World War II era, the atomic bomb, etc. She also talked about the beginning of the space program, when she created seminars, workshops, inviting the public to come. It was a similar kind of dialogue that I'm sharing with you. Of course, we each have our own understanding and experience. We are individuals, right? As part of the whole. Her name is Maria Watts. She also was a musician, as I am a musician. She did things professionally. I've done things professionally, of course, different eras of time. And I came across her through a friend who is in vaudeville at one time, a juggler in a European circus during World War II, who came over here, was brought over here by the William Morris Agency, talent agency. And she introduced me to Maria Watts, her books, and also her lectures, which I was able to get at the time. There's now digital formats available. And it's still, if I need to go to a certain teaching, it's still primarily, not the only, but primarily the one that I go to the most. She talks about the ultimate and that the realization of what we and who we are is consciousness. The ultimate is understanding that the human experience is an illusion. It's not real. However, it's also important to not deny anything. Even deny illusion. And why do I say that? Because something she said resonated with me. It may not resonate with you. Maybe it will later. But what resonated with me when she said, you should never deny anything, don't deny illusion, because something exists where the illusion appears to be. That includes the human body, or as she called it, the assumptive born body. Because if we really feel that we are eternal, or that life is eternal, and that eternity exists, then that means even the body that we seem to have, the body that we are living in, or whatever that, however you want to use the language, it's kind of limited in the words that we can use to describe it. It's an assumptive born body. If we really feel that eternity, eternal life is real, then that means there is no human birth, there's no change, and there's no death of any kind. So what is the body? That's a good conversation to contemplate. For now, the whole experience is an illusion, but we shouldn't deny anything. Exactly where you see the trees, the grass, even what are called material objects, they're not really solid. They appear to be. Everything exists as it is, but it's not what it appears to be. That's why it's important not to deny anything. You don't want to walk into a door that's closed if you don't fully grasp what it is that I'm saying, or don't have an experience of illumination as that's happening. That's a topic that I will have to get into later. Illumination, the experience of being what we really are, which is spiritual consciousness and not human flesh and blood. That's pretty heavy stuff. And if you're not ready to understand or not ready to delve into that more, even just to question it, it's probably better to not listen any further. because it does require an open heart and mind, and it's like the expression, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It's that kind of concept. But for those who do want to know more, or at least are curious, it's not a matter of agreeing or not agreeing. We have our own feelings about things, which is why I usually haven't shared these kinds of things publicly. And when I have shared things publicly, it's been very, very basic. So I'm starting now to go into a little more detail, but basically still the basics. We are spiritual beings. Infinity also means there's no space, as well as eternity means there's no time, technically. There's no beginning, change, or ending. Infinity literally means there are no boundaries. The universe has no boundaries around itself, or lines of demarcation. It's limitless. That's what infinity really is. That is real. Perfection is another word. We know what that means, but we seem to think imperfection exists, just like we seem to think duality exists. It appears to exist. That doesn't mean that it's real. Contemplate that. You can take that concept right there and contemplate it for, let's say, the rest of your afternoon or the rest of your day, or as you go to sleep at night. Just that one concept. Duality is not real. We should not deny it, as I had mentioned before. But exactly where the illusion of duality is, something exists, and that something isn't dualistic. It's one. It's one universe, one universal law, one consciousness, one being, and that's what everything is. That's what we are. Individually, as a whole, everything. It is that simple. There are a lot of details, but it's not complicated. Contemplating that is important. Contemplating in more detail, when we say basically, we ask ourselves the question, who am I? Who are we? Sometimes that's where it has to seem to begin for our awakening. Or as Maria Watts says, the ultimate, the realization of the ultimate, the experience of the ultimate. And she refers a lot to certain scriptures in the what's called the Bible. But I think, for me, what I have realized is that there are various writers of the Bible. That's true. People feel like, well, that's inspired by God. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, the Bible was written down by so-called humans, so it wasn't just one so-called human, one individual, let's say. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It wasn't, the inspirations weren't written down, most likely by just one individual. So there's a lot of individual aspects in interpreting the inspiration. And you could say any book, period, is inspired in some way. That's why there's a form for us to look at. And the Bible does have what we call human history in it, which it seems like we can't really verify that, but a lot of people stick to it and say that's history because it's a historical document. You know, it's written in Hebrew and Greek, and there's many, many interpretations of it along the way. But something exists, and she points out various scriptures at various times where it would seem that some of the individuals that wrote down inspirations we're more, let's say, enlightened than others. Seems that way. Some of it focuses on things that we find appalling, which is one of the reasons why I'm making this recording. Like wars and killing and raping and pillaging and justifying these things. At times it even seems that God would allow these kinds of things. But I'm talking about other scriptures that really refer to what we would call in modern context food for thought, contemplation, contemplating these ideas. And I can get into that some as I go on with this. More specifically, this is right now an introduction. Before going forward with more specifics, which I do as I go on, as I go further. And because of what is happening in the so-called external human world, it's important to start participate in this kind of sharing. So I do a lot of sharing with music and media on a variety of topics. I've always enjoyed variety, particularly music, and I'd say second would be the visual, film, TV, art, etc. But it's also the subject matter. It's important to understand different things and how everything is all connected together. The spiritual is really all. And things are not the way they appear to be. Again, I have to reiterate that because it's true. It's important that we pay attention. It's important that we listen. It's important that we realize this is not about attention for the ego. This is not about materialism, and judging things according to that. Because again, it's not what it appears to be. So you say, well, what is it? Well, we can go into that session by session, segment by segment. Now I'm just putting the general ideas out there that based on response and based on inspiration myself, I can elaborate on later. All the while I'm talking, and you could be thinking of questions, you could be contemplating what I'm saying. It's all in the moment, and that's what's important. Sometimes the silence is how we all contemplate. For those of us that have this understanding that this is something that we should be doing each day. My whole idea of this talk is to be an inspiration, not be persuasive that you should do things my way or think the way I do or say things the way I say them, but just to present ideas for contemplation. And if it's something that you're interested in, we can discuss, we can go further. I'm going to leave you now in this session, this segment, with this one idea that you can contemplate. Everything exists that ever exists now. So if something seems missing in our lives, whatever that might be, it does exist. There's a purpose for how the manifestation presents itself. We all know, I think, that experience, if we contemplate it, those moments when we didn't know what we were going to do, and it seemed very confusing, and all of a sudden at some point, even though you may have been working on something, let's say for a long time, all of a sudden at some point everything lines up, and you could say perfectly, and it manifests itself. It works out because of how that happened. We may not even know exactly how that happened, but somehow it did. The work was done and it all came together, and there it is at some point. Whatever it is that is manifesting itself that we felt maybe previously was a need of some kind. One of the things I like to say is, if everything exists always and we have questions about it, then that could mean really just one thing. If everything exists now and you have questions about something, say it specifically, like, what should I do for my next career? Or what do I do in my relationships? Do I anticipate a new business with friends or a soulmate coming in my life? Be very specific about questions. However, I do feel it's important to understand when we ask questions, like for instance, what is my next career? Or who is my true soulmate? It's very important how we ask the questions. We don't always have to verbalize them. Sometimes just within ourselves, we're asking questions like, I need a job. What is my next job going to be? Or what is my perfect career? Who is my soulmate? Whatever the questions might be that seem to be pressing on our minds. It's important that we don't demand the universe. Or God, you can use God if you'd like, if you feel more comfortable with that. There is a distinction between making a demand of the universe and just asking a question about something that has to exist, and you just don't seem to know what it is at the moment. So you ask a question. What is my next career? What is my next job? Who is my soulmate? Etc., 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 whatever the question might be. The reality of that question, knowing that everything exists already throughout eternity and infinity, and the manifestation of it all is actually perfection, whether we appear to see it at the moment or not. Asking a question without making a demand of the universe is actually proof that the answer to that question already exists. So having said that, contemplate that. I'll say it once more. When asking a question that's not a demand of for the universe to provide something for you, when asking a question that considers an answer, the answer already exists, or you would not have thought of the question in the first place. Contemplate that. This is Dan Nowman Niswander. To be continued, and stay present in the moment, always.